Alrighty, welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington, serving online information entrepreneurs throughout the US and around the world. Welcome to another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. I am super excited to welcome Leisa Peterson today. Welcome, Leisa.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, it's been a little while. So Leisa and I first connected in a mastermind. I want to say it's been well over a year ago, maybe even 2 years, because I think it was close to the start of my podcast and my joining our mastermind group. So it's been a little while. For those of you that don't know Leisa, this is going to be fun because it's like the shortest bio I've ever read on my podcast. Leisa Peterson is the mindful millionaire maker. As a coach, author, business growth strategist, and founder of Wealth Clinic, Leisa helps entrepreneurs and investors stop trading time for money. So simple, so to the point. I know there's a lot more to your story, Leisa, and what you're up to. I know we were just talking about your book, which if you're listening, be sure to pop over and visit the show notes. We'll share everything that Leisa wants us to share, including her book at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Find Leisa's episode. But Leisa, you have the book, The Mindful Millionaire, and I love the color. I mean, the cover. If you are online, you'll have to pop over and check that out. But Leisa was just mentioning that day traders are using her book to stay at the top of their game, which I'm so fascinated by. So Leisa, do you want to start by telling us more about that?
Yeah, the work that I do has evolved definitely over the years, but I am a certified financial planner. I've been helping people with money for over 30 years. I came from very little money or a home where there was a lot of scarcity and challenges, and eventually by my mid-30s became a millionaire and then ultimately multimillionaire through real estate, through saving money, through the old school way, like figuring out how to hold on to my money. And I realized about 10 years ago that I had a problem with my relationship with money, which is I had kind of made it way too important. And I had made lots and lots of sacrifices in my life, kind of worshiping money because we didn't have any growing up. And I thought that if I had money, then I would be happy and safe. And there was a turning point in my life where I was like, this is kind of like a sickness, and I need to understand why I make choices that I do that don't really help me live my best life in
Mm.
pursuit of money. And I went on a journey to, at the time, I was a financial advisor, and I started asking my clients to talk to me on the side. It was kind of like, okay, I'm going to ask you these weird questions, and it's going to be awkward probably, but just answer them. And they'd go to tea or coffee with me, and I would ask them this question, and within 5 or 10 minutes, the tears, the tissue, they're like, nobody's ever asked me these questions before about, I just say, tell me what your backstory is as it pertains to money. And it would be like life-changing conversations. And I got so excited about it that 8.5, almost 9 years ago, I walked away from the advising and started leaning into how could I actually consciously help people change their relationship with money.
Yeah, that piece, your relationship with money, right? I think some people don't think of it as a relationship. And yet, when you think about the role that money plays really in all of our lives, right? Almost as a necessity, but certainly if you have a backstory like yours, which I think truthfully a lot of people can relate to, right? I think a huge majority of people can relate to a feeling of lack or not enough or scarcity or wanting around the topic of money. And it's like I'm just astounded at the things that as an adult become really central to our lives that we learn nothing about as children. outside of, right, just life experience. Like nobody's teaching us this. I had an expert on the other day that he's an expert on deep listening. And he said, basically, we're all doing it wrong, but how would you know any better? Nobody actually ever teaches us how to listen the right way. And I thought, isn't that fascinating? Like one more thing we take for granted that I never really thought about in that way, that there's a right way to do it. And most of us are doing it wrong. And I think this really parallels the money conversation. I think there's a right way for the most part to do money and handle that well. And I think most of us are doing it wrong.
Yeah. I mean, even for myself, I have an MBA in finance. I've worked in the business for 30 years, and it took me 20 years of working with people and their money to one day wake up and be like, this isn't healthy. I may be good with money, and I always had been good with money, but I wasn't good at learning or knowing how to live the best life. And money was preventing me. It wasn't fueling me, it was preventing me from living my best life. And I think that there's the practical aspects of money, which is huge. And it's actually pretty darn complicated, especially as you start to build wealth. Like, there are so many things that I just say, and people are like, wait, stop. What did you just say? Like, they would never know this if they weren't a financial expert. And so I respect that there's a lot of information to learn if you want to hold on to your money and you want to build wealth. But then there's this whole emotional piece that gets triggered. And this is actually the bigger problem for a lot of people, because they either, right, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and then they don't make good decisions. So then they never learn the practical stuff. They're so caught up in the emotions that they can't come out of it to do what I did, I think, and start to make better choices for themselves, not just wealth building, but like, how do you live your best life, which is way more important than how much money you have.
Oh, well, that piece around thinking, if you do certain things with your money, or if you have a certain amount of money, or, whatever the story is that we tell ourselves, then we'll be happy, or then we'll feel safe, or we'll feel like somehow we've arrived or whatever, right? And as with anything, it's a much deeper, different kind of conversation. And I think so often we have to reverse engineer the path forward, right? Because what we think is going to be there, or how we think we're going to feel, is totally wrong. Or it turns out we're not all that good at predicting.
Yeah. The big thing that I realized a few years into this business, which really changed everything and led me to writing The Mindful Millionaire, was that everyone has at least one, if not a handful, of what we'll call edges, where they go from being empowered and strong, and then something happens and they go weak and they struggle. And my skill, maybe because of all those years of working with people and money, and then I also, side note, in 1999, there was a horrible tragedy that occurred in my family. My father was murdered, and it caused me to realize that I didn't know what it meant to be happy. I really questioned, like, if I even wanted to stick around. It was so traumatic that it forced me to go down this path of spiritual discovery and meditation. That's really where I went. And so all these years of meditation and mindfulness, 23, almost 24 years of daily meditation practice, gave me insights into people at a deeper level with what was happening to them. And I started to be able to see these edges. Like, it's like a spidey sense now where I can just see them. And the hardest thing for most people is, this is the sea that we swim in. We don't know that that's our edge. We think that's the way it's always going to be. But if I can point out and show someone, this is what your paradigm looks like around money, not only can I show it to them, I have practices that I help people do to release them, write a new story, and literally that edge is gone. And that, when I figured out that not only did I do this once in a while, but if somebody wants to change and they come to me, it's like, instead of it being years or even months, like within a month of kind of doing the questions, letting me see what's going on inside of their life and in their story, it's gone, and gone like forever, which is so exciting to me. Like, I feel fortunate that it even came to that, because again, I think we just get trapped and we're like, but I don't know what to change. I don't know. Everything I've
Mhm.
tried hasn't worked. And that
Mhm.
was what I was trying to get over.
Yeah. Do you find that these edges, as you describe them, are really attached to experiences, to stories?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And the interpretation that we as a
Mhm.
young person gave to it. We think that the beliefs that we have were given to us by our parents or by a tragedy or by, you know, media. But when we get into it and we realize that in that traumatic situation, we were the creator of that belief
Mhm.
system, we become the most empowered person on the planet, because if we created it, we actually can let it go.
Mhm.
And once you realize that, you're like, oh my gosh, how fast can we let this go? Because I don't want this
Yeah.
anymore.
Right. No, what comes to mind for me, I was having a conversation with my sister the other day, and, same family, different experiences around money as young people, right? So I was like super kind of studious and followed the rules. And my dad was real save, save, save. Like I got the lecture at 5 years old around like if you're paying, if you're going to college, you're going to pay your own way, that kind of stuff. Right. So I was busy earning and saving money as a little person, but all the way through high school. And my sister was much more free spirited. She was more social than I was. Like there was a lot that just made her different. And she was doing this abundance exercise, like a meditation the other day. And she was just sharing with me something that popped into her head that really surprised her. Like she didn't even remember it. And the reason I mention this is because part of my next question, it was going to be around how many of us have stories or experiences that we don't even sometimes directly recall as related to our current interpretation around money, right? And it really takes some digging to get there. So what she learned, she did this meditation and she learned that because it invited her to think about like some experience basically in childhood, young adulthood, that was keeping her stuck around her money story. And she said, Heather, it was so fascinating what popped into my mind. She said, because there was kind of a series of things, but they were like common things that I've looked at over the years. And it was like, nope, not it, not it, not it. And then boom, this one memory dropped in, and bless my parents, but I'm going to tell a little story that, people might judge them for. My mom has since passed and she was a lovely mom, but this particular experience didn't go so well for Ashley because she was at the time working. She was in high school working at like Macy's, right? Our local clothing department store. And she had bought herself a blue sweater on credit, right? As soon as they got a job there, like the store just handed out credit cards to their employees as well, which also I find fascinating. Um, and she bought this blue sweater and then moved off to college, like shortly after. And so what had happened is she was in the car with my parents and they pulled up at home to get the mail. And a couple things, went wrong in what happens next. But one, they get the mail and it includes a statement to Ashley from Macy's. And they open it. Mom opens Ashley's mail rather than handing it to her, right? So there's a boundary issue, number one. But two, then comments on how she shouldn't be buying nice things for herself if she can't afford it, right? And there, anyways, without going into the full story, like Ashley's takeaway is I can't do these nice things for myself. Like I can't afford it, right? And she didn't even really remember that story until she did this meditation. And she was like, Heather, it was really like a poignant example of, and probably truthfully representative of other things that I'm sure felt similar, from childhood and growing up in relation to her own money story. But she claims even like the following day, things shifted for her dramatically in regards to money stuff after doing this one experience. And I just thought, isn't that so interesting that as humans, like, we lived the life, it was our life, and yet we still can't connect the dots on certain things that inform our current perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. When I first started my business, I was struggling with charging, and I couldn't understand it because I mean, I had made so much money and I had such success and I was in sales. So I asked for money all the time in sales, but there was something about being in business for myself that changed everything. And I know a lot
Mm.
of people struggle with that. And same thing like your sister, I realized in doing some shadow work, and it was a like recorded questions. I'm answering these
Mm.
questions. And what came up was I had a deep set fear of being a greedy person. And it attributed to growing up because we struggled with money all the time. Everyone was trying to borrow money from me and I would hide it. And my family would call me selfish and greedy. And just had a reputation from my brother, my mom, my dad as being selfish and greedy. And it came out. And it was funny because I mean, I had to pull over. I was driving, I had to pull over. I'm just sobbing, like, oh my gosh, I had no idea I
Mm.
was holding on to this self hatred about being a greedy person. It sheds as those tears, have this magical way of
Mhm.
letting go. And I think a month later, I was speaking to like 800 women at this conference. And I got up on the stage and I told this story. And I was like, hi, I'm Leisa. I'm a greedy woman, like, and if you can tell 800 women, that you're a greedy
Mhm.
person, you're on the other side of it, of a shadow like that.
Mhm.
But it changed everything. It was also funny is it was so empowering for the women listening. Like people were running to the back of the room, not because I was selling anything, but just to talk to me because they too had one of those stories that they wanted to share with me of like, oh my gosh, just like you, I had this other thing that I was labeled or that I was so afraid of being. And
Mhm.
you saying, you're this made me feel better.
It's so true. And I think the thing that's super unique about money is it's like, I think it can be such an obvious representation of our values. Not always, right? We have to spend money just to survive, but it can be such a representation of our values. It feels so personal, right? It
Mm-hmm.
feels really personal. Like when I think about the challenges, even around having a money conversation in the context of a relationship, right? How you mentioned people go into fight, flight, fawn, or freeze, right? So true. I think probably a lot of people listening can relate to that if they've ever had a challenging discussion around money in the context of a partnership or a marriage or something where, you've got to figure out how to make joint decisions around something that feels really personal.
Yeah. And if you haven't had the opportunity to consciously become aware of why all that emotion is coming up for you, you're going to struggle in the context of that conversation about making any decisions. It's going to feel like a struggle when it doesn't have to be, because logically, and this might be a problem too, our partners may not, well, typically they don't have the same beliefs. So
Mm-hmm.
they're like, this is really simple. Like, why are you getting so upset about it? Or vice versa. We're saying to our partner, why are you so upset? What's happening to you? This is a simple conversation. And I think doing this work makes us more conscious to like, wait a minute, slow down. This isn't about the money. This is about another story or another belief or something that isn't even present right now that's coming up for us.
Mm. Well, and what do you say? Because I assume that there's probably a fair number of people who have done a certain amount of work around their money and around their money history, their money story, whatever you want to call it. Are there ways that we do that work wrong? Like we're looking in the wrong place for that, that transformation? Can you talk to us about what you see kind of in this path of like how you do it the right way versus like other ways that we sometimes get ourselves trapped?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I can, I hear it all the time that, oh, I've done my money work. And then I
Mhm.
find that they haven't changed anything practically. And I'm really adamant when I work with people that you can't just rely on the emotional release.
Mhm.
Like maybe you had it, maybe you didn't. Sometimes people just think that, oh, it's like a thought process. There's no tears, there's no emotion. It's like, oh, I see what wasn't working for me. Now I'm going to do it differently. That would probably be the most likely situation where nothing's going to change. If it's all your head and it isn't your heart and there isn't an emotional release, you may not have gotten to the core of what's
Mhm.
actually holding you back. The other thing is let's say you do have a big shift and you talked about like your sister and what happened for her. The next step that we have to commit ourselves to is that I am going to go into those situations. I'm going to find places where I wouldn't have made a decision or I would have struggled, and I'm
Mhm.
going to face it and I'm going to do something practically. So let's say you're undercharging. Your biggest thing is within the next few days, you need to find an opportunity to go practice charging more and sit in that discomfort and don't back down because it will go away. You'll forget and you'll find a way to go back to where you were rather than creating a whole new reality, practically speaking, for yourself. And
Mhm.
it sounds like that's resonating. Like I see it all the time. People don't understand, and this is where I'm very grounded in reality. Like I like spiritual principles, but I'm going to always bring them into the practical dimension, the
Mhm.
third dimension. Like what's going to happen now as a result of that breakthrough? And if people don't commit to, you know, something practical, there's a good chance it's not going to stick and change.
Mm, I love that piece around actually having to take an action, not only in light of the recent, let's call it discovery or breakthrough or whatever, but because of it and actually implementing something differently. Right. And I think a lot of people can get stuck around that. They might see their story, recognize parts of it for what it is, but still say, turns out I'm just not all that good with money and I'm just going to hire somebody else to handle it for me. Right. Because I see that
Yeah.
a lot, particularly from women who just never get to the point of feeling super empowered about their money.
Yeah. There was this self-help book in the 60s called Psycho Cybernetics. Have you heard of it
I've heard of
before?
it. I have not read it.
Okay, so Maltz, I think is his last name, but what he was a plastic surgeon. This is so fascinating. Plastic surgeon who is helping people, right, with disfigurement
Mm.
and all the things that you do as a plastic surgeon in the 60s. And he's like, I'm not a psychologist, but what I'm noticing is some of my patients will get the work done and they become that person. They
Mhm.
create a new self-image as a result of what they had done. But a whole mess of people will get all of the work done and they will literally go about their lives as if they're still disfigured. Nothing happened
Mm.
and they do not change their self-image. So if that's happening with plastic surgery, it's also happening with even like breakthrough work. Like you literally refuse to create a
Mhm.
new self-image. And I think this is where coaching helps. And oftentimes I kind of have to go back to people and be like, I know it feels so good that you've had this breakthrough, but I really need you to come back and like work with me a little bit further to make sure that you're creating a new self image, a new paradigm that creates what you
Mhm.
want rather than replicating what your comfort zone is going to bring you back to.
Oh, that is so fascinating. I mean, even to the point of like you're looking at a new face and still not accepting it. What it reminds me of is like body dysmorphia and image dysmorphia, right? That people have where what they see is something totally different than what other people see. right? And there's no like again, back to the power and the strength of these brains and not so much brain, right, on our shoulders that can really keep us stuck.
Mm-hmm. And our family and the media and
Mm.
the culture that we live in, a lot of the beliefs about money in our culture are so disempowering,
Mm.
especially for women. Like, I think, you know, my audience is probably 80% women, 20% men. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that women didn't learn it from their families. They
Mm.
didn't learn money from school. They didn't learn money in their jobs. Like, it's hard if you didn't decide to pursue finance like I did to learn this stuff. And then you have cultural beliefs still to this day of dependency. And, you know, I have some clients and they're like, I was trained to get married. And they're still, you know, they're at 60 years old, they're not married, and they're still trying to figure out money.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was going to say, how often do you see somebody who really truly is a phenomenal leader, let's say in their business, they do a great job in, managing their personal life, but they're still falling down in the money department?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have tremendous compassion for that because I say right away in the book, I'm like, it is not your fault. It is
Mm.
not your fault. Like, you are definitely facing challenges, but just because those challenges occurred does not mean that they are, you know, causing you to have to live that way. And one of the things that I explore, because I was a financial advisor for several years, is what you brought up, which is this abdication
Mm.
versus what does it mean to have sovereignty over my money? Nobody's
Mm.
going to care about your money as much as you are. So you better care about it and learn about it. But when you abdicate decisions to other people, it it doesn't ever go as well as it could have gone. And you know, I'll be honest with you, Heather, like, this has been one of my biggest challenges. 9 years into this business, I help people with money. I focus more on the beliefs, but I would still
Mm.
say to this day, it's easier for me to help people with their beliefs about changing the way they think, but it's something that it takes a lot longer to change the practical application of
Mm.
money. One of my best friends, inherited a lot of money, and we have regular discussions, and my mind is blown at like how hard it is to not abdicate responsibility, and how our conversations will go into a rabbit hole. And she's like, how could I ever learn all of this stuff? And I'm like, the only way is to just keep showing up for it again and
Mm.
again. And I'm here for you. I want to help you. I want you to not depend on, you know, these men who happen to help her. Like, we're gonna get there. Even if it takes us 10 years, we're gonna get there. That's how I think of it.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, so what I'm hearing, the first piece in recognizing some of the core components or stories in our own money history, I heard you say like you really should feel an emotion. Like in my mind, what I was thinking is like a visceral reaction to remembering that particular piece of your story, right? Like pit in your stomach, or you know what I mean, lots of grief like you had, like accepting, that the reflection of what your family had labeled you as, greedy around money, etc. Like same here. I call myself a, former penny pincher. I totally pinch pennies, and it was 100% because I got the lecture and I kept getting the lecture around basically you're on your own. You got to do this thing, and that involves like saving your money, figuring out a way, right? And I didn't like it. I didn't like that I was a penny pincher, but my money story has shifted like a lot of people's do along the way. And the next part I'm hearing you say that is really a challenge is getting people to take the steps of practical application once they have the recognition that they can have a new perspective. It's like actually applying that. Like, how do you bring that into your life. So where do you typically start with people around that?
Around the practical aspects?
Yeah, the practical application for people that are like, okay, I get it, and certainly I think many listening still have work to do around the original money story, right? And
Yeah,
we're welcome to revisit that as well if there's things that you'd
right.
like to highlight for us. But particularly around this piece of like how you apply a new perspective or new recognition around your money story, how you want things to be moving forward. Why is it that people get so stuck?
Yeah. Well, I think this is what I was trying to help people with when I was writing the book, because the beginning of the book, part one, is like, here's what your relationship looks like, here's what it might be reflecting. But the second part of the book is a step-by-step process that you go through. So it's like 8 steps to ask yourself those questions and then understand how your relationship is affecting your practical decisions, and then what questions do you need to be asking yourself practically. So to get really specific, let's say you notice that you're great at making money, you're okay at saving some money, but when you get to investing it, everything falls apart and you don't have a good track record. You invest in the stock market right before it goes down. You finally save up the money, you pull the trigger, as they say, and you invest, and then it goes down. Like, you just see that there's a trend there. The Mindful Millionaire is meant to help you say, oh, I see the problems that are causing me to do this, okay, well, this not so great, and then this I'm failing, because you need to have all the parts working, or you're going to come up short, right? We live in a society where, what is it, like 85% of people in the United States are not prepared for retirement in their 60s. So a lot of us are going to have to work a lot longer than we planned. And we're trying to make sure that you just have that preparation covered. And some folks can make lots of money, but they don't have that legacy, or they don't have that longer term plan. Now you know where it's showing up. It's showing up in that part. Now go into the beliefs that would cause you to not invest or to make poor decisions about investing. We're talking right now, and this whole crypto thing is blowing up, and it doesn't surprise me. Like, it was craziness what was happening. I was a licensed financial advisor, and I'm like, oh my gosh, unlicensed people are recommending for you to do all this crazy stuff with crypto. It was a nightmare from my perspective, but nobody would listen to me because I sounded like negative Nelly, right? I mean, I'm sorry, right? I had to apologize. But then now this happens, and you read the articles, and people were like, oh, they were all assuming that the other guy did the research. It's just craziness.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
so that would be an area that is a money block. For people to have done that without doing their own due diligence would represent a block. Now you know what you're going to need to focus on changing going forward. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. It reminds me of the pattern that I look at with clients when they come to me and say, all right, I want to, let's take a simple example. I want to improve or update my client services agreement, right? And I sit down, and it's a much bigger process than just looking at the language on the page and deciding whether it's sufficient, right? We explore their services, how they're delivered. Is there a variety of ways? Like, does the document actually reflect what they're doing? But then one of the questions I ask is, let's talk about red flag scenarios that have happened with your clients in the past, where they didn't understand something, or something wasn't communicated well, or you had a client scenario go sideways, because we can use this document to address some of those red flag scenarios and help you create a better, more qualified client, right? And it sounds like you're saying, on the personal side, look into your own financial red flag scenarios. That's where the blocks are. That's what we have work to do on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it like, when I think about somebody picking up your book, is it a process that they can walk themselves through with just enough time and attention? Or what is your thought around like that being a likely path to success versus somebody actually working with somebody who can reflect this back to them, right? Because I think so often we're already limited in our perspective, right? Which is why
Yeah.
we're where we are. Is it something though that with the help of your book, people can walk themselves through the process?
Most definitely. It was written that way and people have
Mm,
used it that way. And my goal was to give everyone everything I possibly could so they could
mhm,
do the work in the book. Like I didn't hold back. What I think I found is that some people are better DIYers. They'll do it. It
mm,
takes 2 to 3 months to kind of go through that process, in all fairness, based on the feedback
mm.
that I've heard on
Yeah.
average. Because you're doing one chapter a week or two and coming back to it and reflecting, and people will
Mm.
go through it 2 or 3 times and then they're like, okay, I got it, like I see what's going on and I can help myself now. But then there are people who, like, they know time is money. They're like, I just want to get in, I want to get out, I want to get this done. And I mean, some of these breakthroughs like have led to millions of dollars for people that I have no idea. I don't feel like I made that happen, but I'm like the person showing up at the right time for the right people who understand that time is money and I just want to get this done. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think people recognizing, are they the person with the personality to go do the work, or are they the person with the personality that needs the hand holding or needs somebody to really facilitate that process, like you say, because it's an issue of speed or actually wanting to complete it. Um,
Yeah.
what what are the issues that you think people get particularly tripped up on as they do the work?
The biggest issue is that, I mean, I feel like people, let's, this is what's coming up for me. The more successful we become financially or, in our businesses, the harder the work becomes because you're working on things that you have been able to avoid and still had success.
Like you've been able to mask those almost in a way.
Yes, you've been able
Yeah.
to work around them and you don't need to change them. And
Mm,
it's harder to, as a coach, to help someone who has a really strong defined self-image of I am successful, and there's a bit of skepticism I think that comes with it
mm,
of like, you're probably not going to find anything because I've had
yeah.
so much success. And so your ego, your pride is your biggest challenge.
Mm. What is the pain point for people like that, right? Even I'm thinking about some of the listeners who might be like, yeah, I've really got this figured out pretty well. But like you say, they've been able to mask or they built team early. And so, in some ways it's either been supported or handled and not through their own strategy or their own dealing with the process. What ends up being the pain point for those folks who put off the work?
I have somebody who just reached out to me, super successful business, and his is more obvious because he was saying no matter how much money he gets, that fear and that worry won't go away.
Mm,
So that's one. Another would be showing up in relationships, in your partner relationship. And
yeah.
so you've had all this success, but the more success you get, there's a sense that intimacy and connection is actually decreasing.
More challenging.
Yeah, it's more challenging. So
Mm,
it's funny because people always come to me and they're like, well, I thought I was coming to you about money, but then you found the thing that
mm.
kind of opened up everything. Because I mean, Harbecker, he says like how we do one thing is how we do everything, is probably not totally true, but in my line of
I
work,
sure hope not. Yeah.
yeah, my line of work, I do find that there are these patterns that
Mhm.
you are like it's like the Matrix, right? Or that Tetris game. as soon as you see it and you let it go, you're like, oh my gosh, it's actually showing up in every area of my life, but I didn't know it. So it's a huge
Mhm.
shift in not just with your money or that one area of problem, it actually improves everything.
Right. Oh,
So,
it's the pattern recognition, right? And somebody who's recognizing they have a persistent problem in relationships or it's getting worse because of the way that their money makes them feel or not feel, right? So for people that feel like they become a money target, or is this relationship really about me or my money? Or, the Energizer bunny types who can never stop. They can never relax or rest because they're so motivated by money, right? I think there are
yeah.
quite a few of those that are really the fear driven. From the outside it looks like motivation, or looks like, a type A personality or whatever you want to call it, and really it's a fear-based motivation for some people.
Yeah. You don't realize, remember how I started this conversation? If you realize that you're not living your best life, and
Mhm.
it can come from a lot of different reasons, illness, or maybe even thinking that you might be sick or losing a loved one. Like there can be all these wake up calls in life. And those wake up calls can cause you to self reflect and kind of check, check, check. Oh my gosh, like I am not living in the way that I thought. And then once that happens, then we become open and receptive to the idea that maybe I'm missing something. And maybe there is something that keeps me from creating that life that I really want to be living.
Yeah. So I'm curious, cycling back to the first question of how are day traders using your book, right? I'm not sure we got an answer to that. What are they
No,
doing
we
with it?
didn't. Well, once I found out about that, I started talking to these day traders who were saying, oh, I'm a big fan of your work. And I started doing some of this breakthrough work with them. And let's be clear, day traders, there's a system that you learn of how to day trade. That is not the problem. The problem is the mindset of what happens to you when it isn't working, for example, when you
Mhm.
have a bad day. And these day traders, if they're not understanding of their unconscious blocks, it's like water, it runs to like the lowest, place on the map. What happens is their mindset goes to the darkest place
Mhm.
in their past without even knowing it, and they can't do the trades, or they can't stay consistent with their trades. So it's everything we've been talking about, but they're heavily incentivized to figure out what's causing me to know all the things to do and I still can't do it, or I self-sabotage, and it happens fast. So the cool thing is when they do breakthrough work, we can see what happens the next day rather than having
Right.
to wait months or weeks. And that is really interesting to me because what I do, it's not like scientifically proven. We're not using, I've never been to a psychologist in my life. I don't even know what they do. Like I'm looking for a belief
Mhm.
and an understanding that this is not the truth of this person. And if we can let that truth, that their thought that it's true, I know it's not true. If they can let it go, their life is gonna look very differently. And so day traders allow me to test and get a system to understand what's really going on for people and where do they get
Right.
tripped up. It's the same thing.
Yeah, well, I was fascinated by that, thinking that probably had something to do with the speed in which they make financial decisions and, consistently, and the repetition, like their job is based on daily trading, right? So it's
Mhm.
it's very different than most of us who maybe have a significant financial decision to make every once in a while, right? Not
Yes.
daily. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
all your fears rise up and you either look at them and deal with them, or you can't day trade ultimately. You'll
Hmm.
lose too much money.
Mm, yeah. Well, oh my gosh, I've loved this conversation and I feel like it's such a big one. And yet you've given us some real guideposts to look at, to examine in our own stories, our patterns, our habits, our relationship to money, and our relationship to others, and how that's impacted by money. Couple questions for you, and then I want to ask a final one. So one, where do you show up online, and where do you like for folks to connect with you?
I am on Facebook. We have a group called the Mindful Millionaire Community, and I'm regularly there, probably more than anywhere else. So Mindful Millionaire Community on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram at Leisa Peterson, and Twitter at Lise Lusky, which goes way beyond my business, but pretty funny. So those are the places to find me.
Excellent. If you're listening, we will share all of Lisa's links at the show notes page, which you can find at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Find Lisa's episode. And Lisa, I noticed that your link to your Mindful Millionaire community on Facebook is right on your website as well. So we will share your website, which can be found at wealthclinic.com. Two final questions. One is, what do you, if there was one thing that you wish most people knew that they don't, what do you wish that was? Or what is that? There one thing that you wish people knew that they don't?
I wish people knew that money is not a yardstick measurement of worth and value. I wish people knew that that's non-negotiable, that just by being born, you have value and your life has deep meaning. And we get crossed up that money indicates value, and that's not a healthy way to think about it.
And you're talking to a group of entrepreneurs, right? So I feel like we need to say it louder for the kids in the back that money is not the yardstick for measuring your value. How many people get so stuck on that? Yeah, a lot. That's super powerful. And then the final question is, what action step do you wish that our listeners would go do? One thing right now that you would like people who are listening to go do?
So can it be a like shameless plug or
Totally. Can be anything. Yes.
What I'd love them to do is go to wealthclinic.com/vision and check out the first chapter of the book, get a free meditation that is all about reestablishing that value and that self-worth. So the meditation is meant to help you see where you're strong and also where you could spend a bit more time in building up the value that you feel around yourself. I think that's the biggest challenge that people struggle with.
Oh, I love that. If you're listening, be sure to pop over and visit that link. We will share it again at the show notes. But wealthclinic.com/vision. And again, you can find that on the show notes page, which are legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Lisa, it's such a joy to connect with you, learn a little bit more about your story, and then just receive so much value today. I feel like people will really walk away with some things to think about.
Thank you so much. It's been so much fun.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to being in touch. And again, if you're listening, go pop over, connect with Lisa, join her Facebook group, check out her free meditation. I will be going and doing that myself. It sounds fascinating. And I know that I have more work to do in this department. So super grateful for you, Lisa.